Welcome. This chapter covers the reign of Solomon from 1015 to 977 before the Common Era, highlighting his consolidation of power, building projects, and the beginnings of internal tensions. Solomon ascended the throne and made significant choices that shaped both his personal rule and the kingdom's future. Early in his reign, he eliminated rivals, including Adonijah and Joab, to secure his authority. His court became a center of administration and culture, strengthened by alliances with Egypt and the kingdom of Tyre. A defining achievement of Solomon's reign was his extensive building program. He designed and oversaw the construction of the temple, specifying workmen, materials, and architectural details. The consecration of the temple, along with the reorganization of the priesthood, solidified religious centralization. His royal palace and throne symbolized the wealth and stability of the monarchy. Under Solomon, Israel's national wealth grew, trade expanded, and a fleet increased commercial influence. Yet, the seeds of future disunity were sown during his reign. Figures such as Jeroboam emerged, and practices like tolerated idolatry and shifting alliances, including estrangement from Egypt, began to create strains. Neighboring kingdoms grew in power, challenging Israel's dominance, even as Solomon's fame spread far beyond his borders. The chapter concludes with Solomon's death in 977 BCE, marking the end of a period of prosperity, monumental construction, and growing political and religious complexity. David had left the kingdom of Israel in such order and stability that the successor to his throne would have faced little difficulty in governing, provided he was neither foolish nor deceitful, nor swayed by corrupt advisers. Solomon, the son and heir, however, went beyond merely maintaining the legacy of his father. He expanded it, elevating the nation of Israel to a prominence and renown that would echo through the ages. He brought peace, prosperity, and opportunity to the people, ensuring that even the humblest homes were relieved from poverty, and that the nation's intellectual and artistic talents could flourish. By opening channels for learning, by encouraging the cultivation of beauty and the fine arts, and by investing in both material and spiritual works, Solomon transformed Israel into a model state of the ancient world. Generations that came long after him would recognize the radiance of his reign, even while overlooking some of the weaknesses inherent in human leadership. Solomon was deliberate in preserving peace. Though the armies and resources of Israel could have enabled him to pursue further conquests, he chose the path of stability and was known as the King of Peace, or Shalomo in the Hebrew tongue. Under his wise rule, justice prevailed. He resolved disputes between individuals and between tribes with strict impartiality, expanded the number of towns, and safeguarded trade routes and the caravans that traversed them. Jerusalem, the capital city, was filled with magnificence under his direction, and he erected a grand temple in honor of God. He himself devoted time to poetry and the fine arts, giving them prestige and inspiring his people to cultivate their appreciation for beauty. Through these endeavors, he set lofty aims before the nation, earning the enduring title of Wise King. Yet even as history celebrates Solomon, it cannot ignore the blemishes in his rule. The beginning of his reign was marked by acts of violence, including the execution of Adonijah, who had once contested the throne, and Joab, the former commander of David's army, whose loyalty had become suspect. His love of splendor and luxury gradually grew excessive, imposing heavy burdens on the people and fostering despotism. The kingly authority he wielded became increasingly autocratic, with all wills expected to be subordinate to his own. Some of the misdeeds associated with his reign were the result of overzealous servants, while others stemmed from the unavoidable pressures faced by a monarch striving to consolidate power. The weight of responsibility for these actions fell upon him, as it does for all sovereigns who must balance conscience against necessity. Solomon was scarcely 20 years old when he ascended to the throne. Early in his reign, he visited the altar at Gibon, a major city of worship north of Jerusalem, where, according to tradition, he received a vision from God. In this vision, God asked Solomon to declare the innermost wish of his heart, promising that it would be fulfilled. Remarkably, Solomon did not ask for long life, vast wealth, great honor, or the death of his enemies. Instead, he chose wisdom so that he might govern his people with justice and fairness. This wisdom was extraordinary. He could discern the truth amid exaggeration, detect the genuine feelings of disputants, and make decisions that revealed the hidden reality of the situation. One of the most famous examples of Solomon's judgment involved two women who claimed to be the mother of the same infant. Solomon proposed to divide the child in two, giving half to each woman. The real mother immediately offered to relinquish her claim, preferring that the child live rather than be slain, thereby revealing herself as the true parent. In this and countless other decisions, Solomon demonstrated that no one in his kingdom would suffer injustice under his rule. His maxim, that justice is the foundation of a throne, became a defining principle of his reign. Solomon's wisdom extended beyond governance into poetry and allegory. He composed works known as mashal, in which he gave voice to cedars of Lebanon and lowly wall plants, to animals both great and small, to birds of the air, to reptiles, and even to fish, conveying moral lessons through these narratives. These fables, rich in symbolism and insight, taught lessons of virtue, prudence, and understanding. It is recorded that Solomon composed 3,000 such fables and 5,000 songs or proverbs, establishing a literary legacy that informed both the spiritual and cultural life of Israel. Long before Solomon rose to prominence as king of Israel, the art of composing instructive or allegorical stories had already flourished among the Israelites. On Mount Gerizim, Jotham, the son of Gideon, who had served as judge over Israel, delivering the people from oppression, addressed the citizens of Shechem with a cleverly crafted parable, designed to reveal their misdeeds and moral failings without direct accusation. Similarly, the prophet Nathan had concealed his rebuke of King David regarding his transgression with Bathsheba within the framework of a parable. Though Solomon did not invent this literary form, he devoted the leisure granted by his rule to its refinement and elaboration. His extraordinary intellect found further expression in compositions where he depicted characters and circumstances through subtle allusions, leaving their hidden meanings to the discernment of the listener or reader. These enigmatic compositions, shaped in poetic form, were a favored form of entertainment at social gatherings and feasts, and Solomon's ingenuity in devising such mental exercises earned him lasting renown. Yet Solomon's reign was not without error. Many of his missteps arose from an inflated perception of his royal authority, influenced by the courts of Tyre and Egypt with which he maintained constant diplomatic and commercial intercourse. Solomon claimed a prerogative that bordered on impiety for a mortal. He positioned himself as virtually identical with the state, imagining that all interests should revolve around his person, and that all other matters were of secondary importance. It was this conceit that became the stumbling block upon which even his famed wisdom faltered. Samuel's prophecy, spoken at the moment of Israel's selection of the king, was vividly confirmed in Solomon's reign, demonstrating that divine insight had foreseen the challenges that come with such absolute authority. Solomon's ascension to the throne was complicated by his status as a younger son, placed on the throne contrary to the usual laws of succession, while his elder brother Adonijah had been regarded by a portion of the people as the rightful heir. As long as Adonijah lived, Solomon's position remained insecure. To secure his reign, Adonijah had to be removed. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada and leader of the royal bodyguard, forcibly entered Adonijah's residence and executed him. The official justification for this act was that Adonijah had sought to claim Abishag, the young widow of David, thus revealing an intention to contest Solomon's legitimate claim to the throne. No sooner had Adonijah fallen than Joab, the former general who had been loyal to Adonijah, feared a similar fate. Joab, a veteran military leader whose exploits had greatly enhanced the power of Israel and solidified the house of David, fled to the altar on Mount Zion, seeking sanctuary. Yet Benaiah refused to respect this refuge and executed him there. This act was rationalized by asserting that David, on his deathbed, had instructed Solomon to avenge the deaths of Abner, the slain commander of Saul's forces, and Amasa, another general. Joab, having killed both men during times of peace, was thus denied a peaceful death, despite his advanced age. Whether Benaiah acted solely on Solomon's direction or as the influence of a malevolent counselor is uncertain. Joab's death, however, emboldened Israel's enemies and encouraged thoughts of rebellion. Adonijah's priestly supporter, Abiathar, was spared execution but removed from the office of high priest, and Zadok was appointed as sole head of the priesthood. Zadok's descendants would retain this office for over 1,000 years, while Abiathar's line fell into obscurity. Shimei, a Benjamite who had cursed David during his flight from Jerusalem, was also executed. Through these three violent acts, Solomon's throne appeared to attain the stability necessary for Israel. Following these measures, Solomon turned his attention to creating a court of unmatched magnificence, befitting a monarch whose authority stretched from the frontiers of Egypt to the banks of the Euphrates River. In accordance with regional custom, a king's status was enhanced by numerous wives. David had possessed 16 wives, a modest number in comparison to the courts of Egypt and Phoenicia. Solomon, emulating these practices, assembled a vast harem. His first wife was Naamah, an Ammonite princess, and he also took wives from Moab, Aram, Hittite, and Canaanite dynasties. Most importantly, the Egyptian pharaoh since gave him his daughter in marriage, elevating her to the rank of first queen within Solomon's court. Solomon intended this alliance to strengthen the kingdom and secure the dynasty, yet it created unforeseen pressures. The queen's preference for palace comparable to the monumental residences of Egyptian royalty compelled Solomon to plan a new edifice, surpassing even David's cedar palace on Mount Zion in grandeur. This alliance with Egypt also introduced innovations of military and logistical importance, including the importation of horses and chariots. Solomon further cultivated a close and cooperative relationship with Hiram, king of Tyre, with whom David had already established friendly connections. He is said to have married a daughter of Hiram as well, cementing the alliance. This bond with the Phoenician king facilitated large-scale undertakings and ambitious projects, reflecting Solomon's vision of a kingdom both powerful and culturally advanced. The establishment of a vast royal harem under King Solomon demanded an immense body of servants to attend to its numerous households. Solomon maintained a court of unparalleled brilliance, where the ambassadors of tributary and friendly powers had to be received with lavish ceremony and pomp. The king placed great importance on the display of grandeur, and the maintenance of his court required enormous expenditures. As the royal house did not possess extensive estates of its own, the cost of supporting this splendor fell upon the people. To organize this collection, the entire land was divided into 12 administrative divisions, each overseen by a governor tasked with ensuring that the inhabitants provided 1 month's worth of provisions annually. Above these 12 governors, a superior officer, known as a vizier, was appointed to supervise the regular collection of tribute and natural products and to ensure compliance with the king's commands. Solomon was especially intent on raising a magnificent temple dedicated to the God of Israel in Jerusalem, the capital of his kingdom. He could not ignore the fact that neighboring lands, such as Egypt and Phoenicia, were adorned with enormous temples built for their gods, while in his own realm the Ark of the Covenant rested only in a tent. Immediately after ascending to the throne, Solomon began preparations for the sacred edifice, with the site already chosen on Mount Moriah, to the northeast of the city. This was the very place where David, his father, had erected an altar following the cessation of the devastating pestilence. Though silver and gold had already been collected for the purpose, stones and cedar wood still had to be procured and transported. To accomplish this labor-intensive task, Solomon employed workmen from the remnant of the Canaanite population still residing in the land. Though King Saul had previously attempted to reduce their numbers, he had been unable to finish the task due to his ongoing conflicts with David. David, in turn, had left the Canaanites undisturbed, allowing them to live quietly among the Israelites and serve faithfully in his military campaigns against the Philistines and other nations. Solomon, however, conscripted the remaining Ammonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, compelling them to perform the hardest labor. These workers numbered 150,000 young men and able-bodied laborers, forming the backbone of the construction effort. Over them were more than 3,000 Israelite supervisors, with a chief officer named Adoniram overseeing the superintendents and workmen. 80,000 of the enslaved laborers were tasked with quarrying freestone day and night, often working by lamplight, under the guidance of a master from the city of Byblos, who taught the art of precisely shaping and dovetailing heavy blocks. 20,000 others removed the blocks from the quarries and transported them to the building site. Cedar and cypress wood, essential for the temple, were supplied by Hiram, the king of Tyre, a longtime ally and friend of Solomon. Skilled laborers felled the trees in the forests of Lebanon and sent them downstream to Tyre and other ports. From there, the massive logs were floated on rafts to the port of Jaffa and then transported over hills and valleys to Jerusalem, a journey of at least 10 hours. The number of Canaanite laborers was insufficient for this task, so Solomon impressed 30,000 Israelite workers to assist. Each group of 10,000 worked for a month before being relieved by another, remaining free and even receiving wages, though they were not allowed to withdraw voluntarily from the labor. Hiram, king of Tyre, was not without expectation of recompense for his wood and skilled carpenters. Solomon sent him annual tribute in the form of grain, wine, and oil, probably collected from the people through taxation. Hiram also advanced gold for adorning the temple interior. In return, Solomon ceded to Hiram 20 towns in the border region of the tribe of Asher, lying between Phoenicia and Israel. Though these towns were not of great importance and did not entirely satisfy Hiram, they became settled by foreign peoples and were known thereafter as Jelal-Hagoyim, the district of nations, later called Galilee. Once the stones and timber were delivered to the building site, construction of the temple commenced. The edifice was built of freestone, with interior walls lined in cedar planks intricately carved with images of palms, open flower cups, and cherubim winged heads with human faces inlaid with gold. The temple measured 60 cubits in length, 20 cubits in width, and 30 cubits in height. It was divided into the Holy of Holies, called the Debir, a square chamber of 20 cubits on each side, and the holy place, called the Heschel, measuring 40 cubits in length. The inner sanctuary of the temple, known as the Holy of Holies, was situated on an elevated portion of the sacred precincts, rising above the main sanctuary. At its side stood 2 cherubim, sculpted from gilded olive wood, each reaching a height of 10 cubits, with wings extending 5 cubits in breadth. At the entrance of the sanctuary, a spacious open vestibule, called the Ulan, stretched 10 cubits in length and matched the width of the sanctuary itself. In front of this hall, 2 bronze columns stood, carefully wrought by the master artisan Hiram, a man of mixed heritage, whose father was Syrian and whose mother was Naphthalite. The Holy of Holies faced westward, contrary to the custom of the Gentiles, whose temples were oriented toward the rising sun. The gates, made of olive wood, were adorned with gilded cherubim, palms, and flower cups. Folding doors of cypress wood bore similar ornamentation, and the floor of the sanctuary was constructed of cypress wood inlaid with gold. Within the Holy of Holies, nothing was visible except the cherubim, whose purpose was to enshrine the Ark of the Covenant, containing the stone tablets of the law, the 10 Commandments. In the sanctuary itself stood a gilded altar of cedar wood, 5 gilded candlesticks on either side, and a large gilded table for 12 loaves of bread. Surrounding the temple was a spacious courtyard. Inside the vestibule was a large iron altar, alongside a vast water reservoir known as the Iron Sea. Its rim was decorated with open flower cups and lily buds, while the lower portion displayed carved colocynths. This reservoir rested upon 12 iron bowls, 3 facing each cardinal direction. The water was used for washing the hands and feet of the officiating priests before they entered the sanctuary, its flow regulated by a faucet. 10 small basins on wheels, artistically engraved, could be moved as needed. Sacrificial vessels were cast in large quantities by royal command. Every aspect of the temple, both inside and out, displayed wealth, splendor, and careful craftsmanship. After 7 years of construction, the temple was consecrated in the year 1007 of the reign of King Solomon. The month chosen coincided with the completion of the harvest and the vintage. Chiefs from all tribes, along with elders of families, were invited to witness the ceremony. People came from every quarter, amazed at the magnificence of the temple and the spectacle of the sacred rites. The solemn ceremonies began with the transfer of the Ark of the Covenant from Mount Zion, the town of David, to Mount Moriah. The ark retained the bars that had been used during the Israelites' wanderings in the desert, allowing all present to see the holy relic and the 2 stone tablets inscribed with the 10 Commandments. Thousands of sacrifices were offered, and psalms were sung throughout the procession. When the ark was placed within the Holy of Holies, a thick cloud filled the temple, interrupting the service of the Aaronite priests. This phenomenon was interpreted as a sign of divine favor, a confirmation that the consecration had been performed according to God's will. The assembly was moved deeply, filled with joy, reverence, and devotion. King Solomon addressed the crowd with solemn words. God has promised to dwell in a cloud. I have built a dwelling for thee, O God, an abode for thee to dwell in forever. Mount Moriah, in that moment, seemed to echo the grandeur of Mount Sinai, where the voice of God had once spoken from the dense cloud. The temple became an object of veneration for the people, who believed that from between the cherubim, God would reveal the ways in which they were to live. A prophet present, perhaps Ahijah of Shiloh, conveyed to Solomon in the name of God, If thou wilt walk in my law, and obey my commands, and fulfill my behests, then I will fulfill unto thee the promise I made unto David, thy father. I shall dwell in the midst of the sons of Israel, and I will not desert my people. The autumn festivals coincided with the consecration, and the nation celebrated with extraordinary joy. The temple, gleaming with gold and bronze, was both sumptuous and imposing, yet contained no visible image of God. making his invisible presence all the more real to the faithful. It offered a tangible form for the spiritual imagination of the people, and it became the pride and strength of Israel. At the consecration, a new order of religious service was inaugurated, one impossible to perform within the confines of the previous sanctuaries in Shiloh or in the tent at Mount Zion. While a priesthood of Aaron's descendants had always existed, Solomon organized a hierarchy. His son, Azariah, the son of Zadok, was appointed high priest and assisted by subordinate priests. The Levites were arranged into groups, some assisted with sacrifices, others guarded the temple and cared for sacred vessels, while certain families performed the singing and played musical instruments that accompanied the ceremonies. The temple and this organized worship elevated Jerusalem, establishing it as the capital of the land. Pilgrims from all tribes traveled there to witness divine services that could not be held elsewhere. As the city grew in religious and cultural significance, it became an important commercial hub, attracting goods and curiosities from distant lands. Under Solomon's orders, Jerusalem was fortified on all sides, and the temple itself was included within these fortifications, securing both the spiritual and political heart of Israel. The construction of Solomon's royal palace extended over a period of more than 30 years. It was not a single building, but a complex of structures, sprawling across a large area on the northern hill of Jerusalem, in the quarter known as Millo. Closest to the entrance stood the house of the forest of Lebanon, so named for the numerous pillars of cedar wood, arranged in rows of 15 each. This grand hall served as the armory for the king's protection, housing 1,300 guards armed with spears and shields of gold, who also attended the king when he proceeded to the temple. Special care was devoted to the fitting up of the judgment chamber, the hall where Solomon's throne was placed and where he dispensed justice. The walls, from floor to ceiling, were overlaid with cedar and decorated with intricate gold fretwork. The throne itself was a marvel of artistry, made of ivory and inlaid with gold. 6 steps led to the throne, and upon each step were 2 lions, finely wrought to symbolize royal authority and power. On the throne's arms and sides, 2 additional lions reinforced this imagery. Here Solomon heard disputes between citizens, judged cases with fairness, and received ambassadors from distant lands, negotiating treaties or accepting homage. A separate palace was constructed for Solomon, his servants, and his wives, with a distinct residence for the Egyptian princess, moved there from David's house in a ceremonial display of grandeur. It is likely that Solomon also constructed an aqueduct to supply water from the abundant spring of Edom, located approximately a 2-hour journey from Jerusalem, ensuring that both the city and the temple were provided with a reliable source of water. The practice of building opulent cedar edifices spread beyond the king to the nobles, princes, and high officers of Jerusalem, who emulated his taste and wealth. 3 principal channels brought prosperity to the land: the powerful position of the state, the alliance with Egypt, and trade with India. Phoenician merchants of high standing, engaged in wholesale trade, as well as money changers and wealthy lenders, settled in Jerusalem. They were organized into a guild, governed by their own laws, and permitted to maintain their religious rites, including idolatrous practices, under the protection of the treaty Solomon had established with Hiram, king of Tyre. The alliance with Egypt provided horses for the mountainous districts and war chariots, which were in high demand across the Near East. Princes of Aram, the territories along the Euphrates River, and other neighboring rulers, who had formerly obtained horses and chariots from Egypt, now sourced these war materials through Solomon's merchant guild. Solomon stationed 12,000 horses and 1,400 chariots, each drawn by 2 horses, and specially built stables containing 4,000 stalls, ensuring the kingdom's readiness for war. Yet Solomon's greatest gains came from trade with India. The journey had long been perilous for Phoenician merchants because bands of uncivilized and predatory people made the Red Sea coast unsafe. Through his alliance with Hiram, Solomon secured a safer route from the southern border of Judah to the eastern coast of the Red Sea, particularly at the points of Elath and Eziongeber. Caravans of heavily laden camels could now travel securely from Jerusalem to the coast and onward north along the Red Sea. At Hiram's suggestion, Solomon commissioned a fleet of large, robust ships, known as the ships of Tarshish, to be built on the coast at Eziongeber. Hiram provided skilled sailors familiar with the route, and Israelites from the tribes of Asher and Zebulun, who were experienced in seafaring, also manned the vessels. The fleet sailed out of Eziongeber into the Red Sea, which separates Palestine from Egypt, Nubia, and Abyssinia, proceeding along the southern Arabian coast to the mouth of the Indus River in the land of Ophir, now called Sind. After 2 years, the fleet returned to Jerusalem, richly laden with treasures. Camels transported vast quantities of gold, silver, ivory, ebony, apes, brightly colored peacocks, sandalwood, and aromatic plants to the city, astonishing the population. Solomon used ivory to craft a throne, and the sandalwood to decorate harps and lutes for the temple musicians. The palings of the bridge linking the palace to the temple were likewise made from this rare wood. Solomon repeatedly dispatched fleets to Ophir or India, each time bringing back new wealth and exotic goods. The port of Elath grew in strategic and economic importance, with Judean settlers establishing themselves there. The territory of Israel extended from the southern tip of the Red Sea to the Euphrates River. To facilitate the movement of horses and chariots from Aram to the Euphrates, and to transport imported goods from Phoenicia, Solomon constructed roads and ensured the safety of caravans. The mountainous terrain posed obstacles of steep cliffs, sudden drops, and rolling stones, but Solomon's engineers built thoroughfares from Jerusalem northwards, creating the king's high roads, vital arteries for trade, military movements, and the flourishing of the empire. Solomon likely employed the labor of the Canaanite inhabitants, who, as bound servants, were required to participate in the construction projects of the kingdom. Hills and elevated areas were leveled, valleys and depressions were filled, and stones were removed to make the terrain suitable for travel. Roads were made passable for carriages, which could journey uninterrupted from the southern boundaries of the kingdom to the northern frontiers, and caravans traveling from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea encountered no obstacles. Along these thoroughfares, a chain of fortresses was constructed, both to protect travelers and to serve as stations where riders and carriages could rest. In addition to these way stations, Solomon established towns designed for the storage of goods, and these towns also preserved grain for years of scarcity, ensuring the sustenance of the population during times of drought or famine. In this way, Solomon organized the affairs of Israel, securing both the immediate and long-term stability of the kingdom. Unlike his father David, who had relied on the extraordinary counsel of Ahithophel, the wise man from the Judean town of Gilo, Solomon relied primarily on his own intellect and judgment to direct his administration. He appointed responsible officials to implement his instructions and supervise his ambitious plans. The vast scale of his realm and court necessitated the creation of new administrative offices. For the management of his extensive household, Solomon appointed a majordomo, known as Ahishar, to oversee the domestic operations. 12 subordinate officials, charged with attending to the needs of the household, were supervised by a chief officer named Azariah, son of Nathan. A high-ranking officer, Adoniram, son of Abda, was placed over the many thousands of bondmen who labored on roads, fortresses, and public buildings, forming a structure of governance capable of enforcing Solomon's directives across the kingdom. These three offices, majordomo, chief of household officials, and overseer of laborers, represented significant innovations in the administration of Israel under Solomon. The extensive territory and wealth amassed by Solomon enabled the kingdom to hold a position among the great powers of the ancient world. Foreign princes and neighboring nations, often engaged in internal strife, sought the counsel of the Israelitish king, calling upon him to act as an arbitrator because of the widespread reputation of his wisdom. The greatest benefit of Solomon's reign was the peace and quiet that prevailed throughout the land, from Dan, at the northern extremity of Israel, to Beersheba, in the south. The people could live securely, cultivating their vineyards and fig trees in undisturbed tranquility. The prosperity of the land, coupled with long-standing peace, drew the attention of neighboring peoples, the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Idumeans, and even the Egyptians. The high religious culture of Israel, which contrasted sharply with idolatry, and the grandeur of the temple at Jerusalem, inspired these foreigners to seek shelter under the protection of the God of Israel. Israel, its people, and its God became known far and wide during Solomon's reign. Israelitish sailors and merchants, traveling to distant ports, coastal regions, and trading centers, carried stories of their homeland to remote nations, spreading knowledge of its wealth, culture, and faith. In this way, the fame of Solomon, both as a ruler and as a servant of God, resonated across continents, and the Israelitish traders inadvertently became the first emissaries of Israel's religious and cultural influence among neighboring idolatrous nations. One remarkable event during Solomon's reign was the arrival of an extraordinary embassy from the distant, spice-bearing land of Sheba, located along the Arabian coast of the Red Sea. The queen of this land, known in tradition as Belkis, had heard accounts of Solomon's wisdom and the grandeur of the temple he had constructed to the God of Israel. Determined to verify the truth of these reports, she journeyed to Jerusalem to see the king for herself. Solomon received her with great courtesy and attention, granting her numerous interviews. The queen, impressed by the king's intellect, the brilliance of his court, and the magnificence of the temple, posed challenging riddles to him, which he answered with skill, demonstrating wisdom that astonished even a foreign monarch. Despite Solomon's efforts to consolidate the tribes into a single, united nation, this brilliant rule also sowed seeds of division. While the temple served as a symbolic center of unity, Solomon succeeded in fully integrating only the tribe of Benjamin with Judah. The temple's location within Benjamite territory drew several families from Benjamin to settle in the capital, strengthening their connection with the southern tribe. It is likely that Solomon also favored Benjamin and his own ancestral tribe over the others. Yet discontent persisted among the northern tribes, particularly in the regions of Ephraim and Manasseh. Although they enjoyed the prosperity brought by Solomon's reign, they resented the burden of supplying materials for the king's court and providing forced labor for construction projects. Their dissatisfaction remained largely unspoken but lingered beneath the surface, waiting for an opportunity to emerge. Among the officials supervising these construction projects was Jeroboam, son of Nebat, an Ephraimite from the town of Zereda or Zorthan, on the far side of the Jordan River. Orphaned from his father, Jeroboam acted without paternal guidance, allowing him to pursue his ambitions unchecked. He proved skillful and decisive in managing the laborers and directing the construction of Jerusalem's walls. Solomon, pleased with Jeroboam's abilities, granted him a high position over the territories of Ephraim and Manasseh. In this capacity, Jeroboam became fully aware of the simmering discontent among the northern tribes, particularly the Ephraimites, who were accustomed to asserting their independence. Observing this unrest, Jeroboam began to cultivate a vision for his own advancement, patiently waiting a moment when he could harness the popular dissatisfaction to challenge the authority of the throne. King Solomon, despite all his accomplishments, fell into the grave error of permitting sacrificial altars to be built for a variety of foreign gods. The causes of this folly were manifold. Perhaps it was the influence of his foreign wives, whose devotion to their ancestral deities pressed upon him, or perhaps it was the influx of foreigners into Jerusalem, including Phoenicians and other nations, who had been granted permission to worship their gods according to their customs. On the northern heights of the Mount of Olives, altars were erected for Astarte of the Zidonians, Milcom of the Ammonites, Chemosh of the Moabites, and other idols. The religious convictions of the Israelites were not so deeply ingrained that they could witness such idolatry without risk of corruption, and many were tempted to fall into these errors themselves. A prophet named Ahijah of Shiloh had the courage to rebuke King Solomon and to warn him of the imminent danger that his actions had invited. Solomon, however, paid little heed to the prophet's counsel, provoking Ahijah's indignation. The prophet, perceiving the ambitions of Jeroboam, a man likely harboring secret designs against Solomon, resolved to use him as the instrument of the king's eventual downfall. When Jeroboam departed from Jerusalem, the prophet approached him, seized his garment, and tore it into 12 pieces. Handing 10 of these pieces to Jeroboam, he proclaimed, "Take these 10 pieces. They represent the 10 tribes which will separate themselves from the house of David and recognize you as their king." Jeroboam, emboldened by the prophet's message, hurried to the territories of Ephraim and called upon the Ephraimites to secede from the house of David. Solomon soon received word of Jeroboam's designs and dispatched his guards to kill the rebel before the insurrection could spread. Jeroboam fled to Egypt, where a new dynasty had recently ascended the throne. Shishak, also called Sheshonq or Sesenchosis, reigned from 980 to 959 before the Common Era, establishing this new line of pharaohs. Under Shishak, the bond between Israel and Egypt, which had existed since Solomon's marriage to the Egyptian princess, was severed. Shishak viewed the growing power of Israel with suspicion and animosity, and he received Jeroboam graciously, intending to use him as an instrument against Solomon. At the same time, Shishak provided asylum to an Idumean prince named Hadad, a relative of the king of Idumea whom David had previously conquered. When Hadad was a boy, he had escaped the massacre carried out by Joab, David's general, during a revolt in Idumea. With Shishak's support, Hadad married the sister of the queen and raised his firstborn son, Genubath, among the Egyptian princes. He acquired lands and honors in Egypt, yet he longed to return to Edom and reclaim the territories lost to Israel. With Shishak's approval, He assembled troops in Idumea and harassed Solomon's caravans, which transported goods between the Bay of Elath on the Red Sea and the borders of Israel. Solomon's forces were unable to prevent these attacks, and the disruption went largely unnoticed by him. Meanwhile, another threat arose in the north. Rezan, formerly a servant of King Hadadezer of Zobah, whom David had defeated, had fled after his sovereign's downfall. He gathered a band of warriors, conducting raids between the Euphrates River and the northern ranges of the Lebanon Mountains. Rezan's forces grew in number and courage, and he eventually captured the ancient city of Damascus, declaring himself king. From this northern position, Rezan waged hostilities against Israel and its allies, unopposed, as Solomon either disliked war or lacked sufficient troops to resist these assaults. In this way, enemies of Israel arose quietly yet dangerously, while within, internal divisions threatened the kingdom. King Solomon did not live to witness the full unfolding of these dangers. He died peacefully at approximately 60 years of age, in 977 before the Common Era. His body was interred, no doubt with great ceremony, in the rocky mausoleum for kings built by his father David on the southern slope of Mount Zion. Later traditions reported that Solomon, like his father, accumulated immense treasures hidden in the vaults and cells of these royal tombs, which were discovered centuries afterward by subsequent Jewish kings. Although Solomon had many wives, he appears to have left only a few children, a son named Rehoboam, and two daughters, Taphath and Basmath, whom he married to two of his officers. Posterity has greatly exaggerated Solomon's wisdom and attributed to him power over mystic spirits and demons. According to legend, these supernatural beings obeyed his will, and a ring engraved with his name could invoke or dismiss them. The Israelite kingdom, elevated by Solomon's wealth and splendor, resembled a realm of magic, a world held together by spirits and enchantments. Upon his death, that spell was broken, and the fragile grandeur he had built began to waver.